Case 185.5. We now come to the summing up of case 185.4, State versus Mr. Claus, Santa, and the subsequent case 185.5. Members of the jury, this has been a long and interesting case, and I am inclined to leniency. Mr. Claus has failed to appear at any of these hearings, and as evidence has been produced, and as you have heard from all the witnesses, mostly children or former children, Mr. Claus does not in fact exist at all. This came as a shock to me, as I had never been let in on this grand deception. Nevertheless, even though case 185.4 State versus Mr. Claus Santa has now been thrown out because of a lack of defendant, we move swiftly on to the subsequent case of 185.5, State versus Parents. In this case, we have heard from many parents, children, and former children about the gross deception and trickery inflicted upon children throughout the land. We have heard from psychologists who have differentiated between telling fictional stories that feature Santa Claus and actively deceiving a child into believing that Santa Claus is real. According to these psychologists, imaginative play in which children know that Santa Claus is only a character in a story, but pretend that he is real, just like they pretend that superheroes or other fictional characters are real, is valuable. Actually, deceiving a child into believing in Santa Claus's real-world existence, sometimes even to the extent of fabricating false evidence to convince them, despite their growing natural doubts, does not result in imaginative play and can promote credulity in the face of strong evidence against Santa Claus's existence. Children will eventually know that their parents have deceived them. In troubling testimony, we heard that the adults they count on to provide reliable evidence about the world introduce them to Santa. Then his evidence is affirmed by and validated by hard evidence. Half-eaten biscuits and empty milk glasses by the tree on Christmas morning, and even glasses of sherry that have been thoroughly drained, presumably by the parents themselves. In other words, children do a great job of scientifically evaluating Santa, and parents do an even greater job of duping them. The many complaints we have heard against parents, and which have been expressed very clearly in this court from disgruntled children and former children, are the following. That lying is normally bad, that parents intentionally lying to their children promotes distrust, that it promotes selfishness, greed, and materialism, that it associates good behavior with being materially rewarded with presents from Santa Claus himself, and that tricking children into believing falsehoods interferes with the development of critical thinking. With no greater good than having some fun, some have charged that the deception is more about the parents and their short-term happiness in seeing children excited by Santa Claus, and their own nostalgic willingness to prolong the age of magical thinking, than it is about the children. We heard from a professor who said, "It's a lie, it degrades your parental trustworthiness, it encourages credulity, it does not encourage imagination, and it's equivalent to bribing your kids for good behavior." In the case from the defense, we heard from psychologists who see little harm in belief in Santa Claus, and that because it is cultural, not parental, that the lie does not usually undermine parental trust. I now ask you, as members of the jury, to remember the comment we heard from one spokesman speaking on behalf of the parents. "It would be a hard-hearted parent indeed who frowned upon the innocent joys of our children's cultural heritage. We save our bar humbugs for the things that exploit the vulnerable." In summing up, I would like you to weigh the following. Most children do not remain angry or embarrassed about the deception for very long. In a study of 500 children on this issue, it was found that not a single child was angry at their parents for telling them Santa Claus was real. The most common response to finding out the truth was that they felt older and more mature. They now knew something that the younger kids did not. In other studies, a small fraction of children felt betrayed by their parents, but disappointment was a more common response. Some children have reacted strongly, including rejecting the family's religious beliefs on the grounds that if the parents lied about the unprovable existence of Santa Claus, then they might lie about the existence of God as well. Having heard all the evidence presented, I ask you to deliberate carefully and bring me a unanimous verdict. Court is adjourned. Order! Silence in the court. I have been handed the unanimous verdict from members of our jury. All rise. In the case of 185.5, State versus Parents, the jury have found parents guilty on all charges. I am inclined towards leniency, and the sentence in this case carries a maximum tariff of a life ban from all merriment at Christmas, including mince pies, crackers, or Christmas-themed jumpers. However, as children's own pleasure could well be impinged upon by too harsh a penalty upon parents, I have simply decided to issue a 1-year ban against parents eating mince pies or pulling crackers. For 1 year only, these pleasures will be exclusively for children. Case is closed.